What if you paid for a first-class seat and someone still told you, "Sorry, this seat isn't for people like you"? What would you do? Would you argue? Would you fight back? Or would you simply stay seated? This is the story of Selena Moore, a calm, powerful black CEO who boarded a flight like any other. But 12 minutes after takeoff, a decision from a flight attendant would challenge everything: her dignity, her identity, and the very seat she rightfully owned. What happened next didn't involve yelling. It didn't involve protest signs or headlines. It involved silence, stillness, and something far more disruptive than noise-quiet power. Why did a video of her doing nothing spark global conversation? What did the captain see that made him defy protocol? And how did one woman's stillness shake an entire industry? Before we begin this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Silent Defenders, where true stories of dignity and quiet resistance come to light. Now, lean in, because this is not just a flight, it's a turning point. The terminal air was crisp with anticipation, the kind that hums beneath fluorescent lights and polished glass, where the silence between boarding announcements stretches just long enough to make you check your gate again. Selena Moore didn't need to. She had flown this route dozens of times. Her black leather carry-on rolled soundlessly behind her as she moved through the jet bridge toward Flight 614 bound for Copenhagen. Her movements were practiced, efficient, the kind of quiet grace that comes from being watched her whole life. Every step deliberate, every breath controlled. She was dressed simply, as always. A charcoal wool suit jacket tailored to perfection, matched with tapered slacks and a white silk blouse. Her braids were pinned back neatly, revealing the soft strength of her face. No makeup beyond a touch of gloss, no jewelry beyond the silver wedding band she still wore, though she hadn't spoken to her ex-husband in nearly 2 years. Her seat was 1A, window, left side. It always was. As she stepped into the cabin, the scent of lavender and leather greeted her. First class was still quiet, only a few passengers seated. A middle-aged couple to her right murmured about hotel reservations. A businessman in 2B tapped nervously at a spreadsheet. One flight attendant, younger, gave her a soft smile. The other, older, did not. Selena nodded politely and made her way to her seat. She placed her bag overhead with ease, then sat. Her body sank into the plush leather, the familiar click of the seatbelt snapping into place like punctuation. She exhaled. The world outside the oval window blurred beneath a sheen of raindrops. New York was still clinging to winter. She reached into her bag, pulled out her tablet, and opened a report she had half finished editing. It was a final review before the Copenhagen summit, where she would speak on the integration of ethical AI in developing nations. Her company, Luminar Systems, had just secured its 4th round of funding and was being watched closely by 3 international tech boards. Selena was calm, not because things were easy, but because she had trained herself to breathe beneath pressure, to wait, to calculate, to never let the moment control her. The boarding process continued. Footsteps, suitcases, laughter in economy. She was vaguely aware of the movement around her. Then, a shadow. The older flight attendant stood beside her now, trim, white, and polished in every sense. Her hair was blonde and pulled so tightly back it seemed to ache. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, voice clipped and professional. Selena looked up, her expression neutral. "Yes, there may be an issue with this seat," the attendant continued, her eyes scanning Selena as if completing a security checklist. "It appears that 1A has been reassigned. Would you mind stepping out for a moment while we verify?" Selena blinked. Slowly, she tilted the tablet down and tapped the screen to pause the video she had been reviewing. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "That can't be right. This is my seat." The attendant's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I understand, but we're still confirming. Sometimes these things happen." Selena didn't move. Instead, she reached calmly into the seat pocket and retrieved her boarding pass. She handed it to the attendant. "Selena Moore. Seat 1A. Confirmed through both my assistant and corporate booking. You're welcome to check it again." There was no aggression in her tone, no panic, just quiet authority, the kind that had unsettled gatekeepers her whole life. The attendant didn't take the pass. She glanced at it and waved a hand. "We'll sort it out. Please just step aside while we check with the manifest." A pause. Selena didn't move. "Instead," she said gently, "but clearly I'd prefer to remain seated until we resolve it. If there's an error, we can correct it from here." The attendant stiffened. Passengers in nearby rows had started to pay attention. Subtle glances. The businessman in 2B shifted in his seat. "I'm sure you understand," Selena added. "I've had a long day, and this seat was assigned to me. If there's a change, I'd like to see written confirmation." Still calm, still seated, but her tone had changed, barely, just enough to be felt. The attendant's smile faltered. Behind her, the younger crew member Latina, early 30s with wide brown eyes, stepped forward slightly, then stopped. Watching. The older attendant's voice sharpened. "We'll confirm shortly. But please do not make this difficult." Selena's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the seat. She did not stand. She simply said, "I'm not making it difficult. I'm just asking for what I've paid for." A beat of silence, then 2. And suddenly, the cabin wasn't quiet because it was peaceful. It was quiet because something unspeakable had landed in the air. The attendant exhaled and walked off briskly. Selena remained still. The leather beneath her was soft, luxurious, and suddenly felt very cold. She stared straight ahead. Her breath was even, but inside, the dull ache of something familiar began to rise. A tension, not fear, not shame, something older, something she had swallowed 1,000 times before. She had been mistaken for the assistant, the intern, the +1. She had been asked how she could afford that watch, that apartment, that car. She had smiled through assumptions, bit down on responses, protected her own peace, but now, on this aircraft, with no error in her booking, no reason to move, she was being asked to leave her seat because someone decided she didn't look right in it. She closed her eyes, only for a moment. Then she opened them again, fixed on the window. The rain had slowed. Trina Caldwell was used to control. 30 years with the airline had earned her a sharp eye, a steel spine, and a carefully curated smile that never quite reached her eyes. She knew how to spot a passenger who didn't fit, a misplaced backpack, a smuggled pet, an upgrade that clearly shouldn't have happened. She prided herself on keeping things orderly, professional, predictable, but the woman in seat 1A was none of those things. Trina had studied her quietly during boarding. The expensive but understated clothes, the confident walk, the fact that she didn't smile when greeted, that was always telling. Now, back in the galley, Trina stood with her arms crossed as she tapped her earpiece, calling operations for confirmation. There must have been a mistake. The name was right, the boarding pass was right, but it still didn't sit well with her. Not in 1A. She turned and glanced through the curtain into the cabin. Selena Moore still hadn't moved. She was seated, hands folded now, eyes forward, not fidgeting, not arguing, not apologizing. Just there, like she belonged. Trina didn't like it. Behind her. Isabel Torres hovered silently, holding a tablet and biting her lower lip. "You saw the manifest, too, right?" Trina asked, her voice low. Isabel nodded hesitantly. "Yes, but then this shouldn't be a discussion." Trina interrupted. "This is about consistency, passenger flow, appearance. The word hung in the air a moment longer than it should have. Isabel's expression faltered. Trina walked back toward the front cabin. Her expression smoothed back into something corporate. She was just doing her job. That's what she told herself. Always. At row 1, she stopped just beside Selena again, who remained seated, calm as a stone. "Ms. Moore," Trina began, "I've contacted ground operations. There's still a chance there was an error in the system. This particular route is tightly managed." Selena's eyes flicked toward her. "I understand," she said, her voice low, "but this is my seat, and until there's evidence otherwise, I'll stay right here." Trina smiled tightly, the kind of smile that said everything she wasn't allowed to say out loud. Just then, the curtain rustled behind them. Another figure approached. A tall white man, early 50s, with graying temples and a tangle of nerves in his posture. He clutched his boarding pass in both hands. Excuse me," he said, glancing between them. "I was told this was my seat." Selena didn't move. Trina turned toward him, placing a gentle hand on his elbow. "Mr. Callahan, thank you for your patience. There seems to be a discrepancy. We're working on it." He looked flustered, uncomfortable. His eyes darted to Selena, who returned his gaze evenly. No hostility, no emotion, just presence. He looked away. "I'm happy to wait," he murmured, retreating a step. "Really. Take your time." Trina's jaw tightened. Behind her, Isabel stood silent, eyes wide. Selena said nothing, but her stillness was louder than shouting. Trina turned sharply and walked back toward the galley, pulling out her tablet with an annoyed flick of her wrist. Passengers were watching now. They always watched when things weren't quiet. She needed a decision, and she needed it fast. Meanwhile, Selena leaned back ever so slightly in her seat, her spine straight against the leather. Inside her, emotions churned in slow rotation. This wasn't her first encounter with polite dismissal. It wouldn't be her last, but each one felt like a paper cut layered on top of an old wound. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Just tired. Tired of the way the doubt always showed up before the apology. She closed her eyes, just for a breath. This wasn't the time to unravel. She remembered the awards dinner last year, how the valet had ignored her to open the door for her male colleague instead, how the hotel concierge had called her Ms. Moore's assistant, though she had just spoken at the conference. She'd learned long ago how to hold her poise in the face of subtle erasure. She had built luminar systems with that poise, brick by brick. Now, here it was again. Same pattern, different setting. From her seat, she could feel the shift in the cabin. Passengers no longer pretending not to notice. One man coughed loudly. Another shuffled in his seat. She didn't blame them. It was uncomfortable to witness. That was part of why most people said nothing. But that wasn't her problem to solve. She hadn't caused this. She wouldn't carry it. Just then, Isabel stepped forward, her fingers nervously adjusting the edge of her uniform blouse. She leaned slightly toward Selena, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. Ms. Moore," she said. "We're still checking. It shouldn't have happened like this." Selena looked up at her. In Isabel's face, she saw conflict, not hostility, not pity, something human. Selena gave her the smallest nod, not forgiveness, not agreement, just acknowledgement. Isabel stepped back. Selena reached down for her tablet again. If they were going to pretend this was normal, then so would she. She opened her file again, scrolled, but her eyes didn't read the words. Her mind was elsewhere, in another time, another place, her mother's kitchen, the smell of collard greens and ironed clothes, the old radio playing Marvin Gaye, her mother standing by the sink, saying softly, "You've got to know when to speak and when to sit still. Sometimes, baby girl, the silence is the loudest thing you'll ever have." Selena inhaled and sat still. Outside the window, a light drizzle had started again, streaking softly down the glass. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew she would not be the one to move. Derek Callahan stood awkwardly in the narrow space between rows, still holding his boarding pass like a get-out-of-jail-free card that no longer made him feel free. He wasn't a cruel man. Not bigoted, at least not intentionally. He worked in finance. He donated to charities. He taught his kids to say please and thank you and never assume. And yet, here he was, waiting for a black woman to give up her seat so he could take it. He hated the feeling. Across from him, Selena Moore hadn't moved. She hadn't blinked in his direction since his arrival. Her posture, calm and poised, made it impossible to justify anything. He thought about saying something. He didn't. Instead, he retreated to the galley where Trina Caldwell stood, arms folded, seething quietly beneath a mask of grace. "I don't want to cause a scene," he murmured. Trina barely looked at him. "Of course not. Sir, we'll handle it." Handle what Derek almost asked, but he didn't. He just nodded and stepped away. The cabin had turned into a theater now. Rows of neatly dressed strangers shifted in their seats, glancing from behind newspapers and over plastic champagne flutes. The soft hum of casual conversation had vanished. The flight hadn't even pushed back, but tension had taken off. In seat 3C, a young man stared quietly at the scene unfolding. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved, but his phone was in his hand. He had seen the flight attendant approach, had watched the subtle tilt of her chin, the way she loomed just a little too long, the way the older man was ushered in without question. The man in 3C was Malik Jennings, 27, data analyst, usually invisible in these kinds of spaces, but not today. Today. Something in his chest had stirred when he saw the way that woman in 1A held her ground. It reminded him of his mother, of his aunt who raised him after the accident, of all the women he'd watched keep their mouths shut in the face of things that should never have been allowed to happen. He wasn't going to speak, but he was going to see. And he was going to record. Selena hadn't noticed him yet. Her attention was forward, controlled. But she knew eyes were on her. She could feel them, some sympathetic, some judging, most confused. That was always the hardest part, the confusion, the disbelief, the inner math people did. calculating whether something really was what it seemed, or whether they were overreacting. She'd seen it in board meetings when her authority was questioned. She'd seen it in stores when she was followed. She saw it now in the faces around her. That slow dawning discomfort that made people turn away rather than step in. She had stopped hoping anyone would speak up. She had learned, long ago, not to wait for that. Behind her, the curtain shifted again. Isabel Torres peeked through, then paused. Her hands were trembling slightly. She was gripping a warm towel she'd been preparing for the next round of service. But now, it just felt like something to hold. Her stomach twisted. Trina's behavior wasn't just off. It was intentional. She had seen the way her supervisor glanced at the manifest, not even surprised, almost expectant. She'd heard her mutter that word again, consistency. It made Isabel's skin crawl. She didn't have the words, not yet, not in this moment, but she had eyes. She had ears, and what she saw didn't feel like protocol. It felt like a performance. And Selena Moore was being cast as a disruption for simply existing where she wasn't expected. In her pocket, her own phone buzzed. A group chat. Another crew member had noticed the tension and messaged, "Something's going down in 1A." You see, in this, Isabel didn't reply. She couldn't look away. Back at the front, Trina was speaking into her earpiece again. Her voice was lower now, laced with something more than just annoyance. She glanced back toward Selena, who remained motionless. There was a flicker of something in Trina's eyes, frustration, maybe fear, but also something colder. She turned to Isabel without speaking. Just a look. Isabel straightened. Her eyes widened slightly. The unspoken command was clear. "Get ready." Isabel hesitated. Selena, still seated, could feel the shift. Her instincts, long sharpened by subtle offenses and silent rooms, told her everything she needed to know. They were preparing to remove her, physically. The thought passed through her like a ripple. Would she resist? Would she stand? Would she go quietly, document it later, write an op-ed? Would it even matter? She didn't know. All she knew was that moving now would confirm something she didn't agree to, would make her a participant in a lie she didn't consent to. So she sat, and across the aisle. Malik's finger slid to the record button. The red light blinked to life. One silent witness. One lens trained on the truth. In the galley, Trina's voice sharpened. "She's refusing to comply," she said. "I'm escalating." And just like that, the situation shifted, from awkward to serious, from uncomfortable to dangerous. Selena closed her tablet. She folded her hands in her lap. Her heart was beating faster now, but her face remained composed. She'd been underestimated before. This wasn't new, but something in her chest ached. A quiet grief that even here, in a seat she paid for, in a role she earned, in a cabin designed for comfort, she was still a target, still seen as out of place, still expected to explain herself, to give up ground, to be grateful for the chance to try again tomorrow. She looked toward the window, her reflection faint in the curved glass. Rain traced the edge of the wing, and then, from just behind her shoulder, a quiet voice. "Excuse me, ma'am." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Malik Jennings had never been one to record people. He didn't like how the world had turned everything into content. But this wasn't about clicks or views or going viral. This was about proof. He had watched too many things happen without witnesses. Too many people walk away without consequence. So he held the phone steady, just low enough to remain discreet, just high enough to see clearly. From his seat in 3C, he could see the tension building like a storm cloud in the front row. Selena Moore hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken again. But her presence had only grown louder in the silence. Trina Caldwell, on the other hand, was pacing. She walked a few steps toward the cockpit, then back to the galley, speaking into her headset, her mouth a tight line. Malik couldn't hear everything, but he picked up a few words: non-compliant, escalation, security protocol. He saw Isabel Torres watching from the side, her eyes wide, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. She looked young, not in age, but in conviction, like she wanted to help but didn't know if she was allowed to. That was the trick, wasn't it? You could always tell who wanted to do the right thing, but whether they had the courage to do it, that was something else. Malik kept recording. The cabin was still frozen in quiet suspense. A woman 2 rows ahead clutched her purse tighter. A man in 2B looked straight ahead, determined not to see anything at all. The atmosphere was sharp now, dense. Trina turned back toward Selena with an edge in her step. "Ms. Moore," she said, "this is the final request. You are holding up the flight. If you do not vacate the seat voluntarily, we will be forced to remove you." Her tone was no longer professional. It was sharp, defensive, threatened. Selena did not flinch. She looked at Trina calmly and said, "I have shown my boarding pass. I was seated here well before this disruption. If you believe there's an error, I suggest checking with operations again. I am not moving." Her voice was smooth, clear, immovable. Trina opened her mouth to respond but paused. Her earpiece crackled. She turned slightly away to listen, her jaw clenched. Without another word, she walked quickly toward the cockpit and knocked twice on the door. Malik's camera didn't miss it. From behind him, someone whispered, "She's really calling the captain." Someone else muttered, "This is ridiculous," but no one stood up. No one addressed Trina directly. Malek lowered his phone for a moment and looked around. He had never felt such a strange mix of stillness and shame, like the entire plane was waiting for permission to have a conscience. Isabel took a hesitant step forward. She stopped beside Selena's row and leaned closer. "I believe you," she whispered. I don't have the authority. I'm so sorry." Selena glanced up at her. Her eyes didn't narrow, her tone didn't change. She simply said, "Then use your voice." Isabel froze. The words landed softly but heavily. She didn't know what to say. She stepped back again, swallowing whatever courage had started to rise. Malik caught all of it, every flicker of doubt, every beat of silent complicity. The curtain at the cockpit door rustled. The cabin seemed to inhale as one. Then the door opened. The captain stepped out. He wasn't what Malik expected. Captain Elias Hart was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made people sit straighter without realizing why. His face was lined not with age, but with experience. He had the look of someone who had seen too many storms, both inside the cockpit and beyond it. He didn't speak right away. He scanned the front of the cabin with practiced calm. His eyes landed on Selena first, then Trina, then Derek Callahan, who was now seated nervously in 1C, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Trina stepped forward quickly. "Captain, we have a passenger refusing to comply with the seat reassignment. It's causing a delay. I believe it's a system issue, but she won't cooperate." The captain held up a hand. It was not aggressive, but it stopped Trina mid-sentence. "Let me see the boarding passes," he said simply. Trina hesitated, then tapped on her tablet, opening the digital manifest. She handed it to him. He accepted it without comment, then turned to Selina. "Ms. Moore," he said, his voice low and steady. "May I see your boarding pass? Please." Selina handed it to him without a word. The cabin was so quiet that even the soft rustle of paper sounded loud. Captain Hart studied both documents. His eyes moved between the tablet and the printed pass. His expression unreadable. The seconds dragged. Every passenger in first class watched, barely breathing. From Malik's seat, the red recording light kept pulsing. Waiting. Finally. Captain Hart lowered both documents. His eyes moved to Trina, then back to Selina. He spoke quietly, but his words cut through the silence like a blade. "Seat 1A belongs to Ms. Moore." Trina blinked. For a split second, her expression flickered. It was almost disbelief, almost insult. She opened her mouth. The captain didn't wait. He turned back to Selina. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "Please remain seated." Then, turning to Trina, he added, "We'll discuss the protocol later." And, just like that, the power in the cabin shifted. Selina let out the smallest breath, not a sigh, not relief, something deeper, like pressure releasing from the inside of a sealed jar. Trina's face had gone rigid. Behind her, Isabel looked down at her shoes, her cheeks flushed with something like shame. Captain Hart nodded once more to Selina, then returned to the cockpit without further ceremony. No dramatics, no apology, just order restored. Malik stopped recording. He didn't smile, but something in his chest felt less heavy. He looked back at Selina. She had already returned to her tablet, her face serene, but her shoulders were straighter than before. She hadn't moved for anyone, and now, finally, the world had moved around her. The cockpit door closed gently behind Captain Hart, sealing away the steady authority that had briefly pierced the mounting tension in the cabin. But the silence he left behind did not dissipate. It deepened. First class sat wrapped in a stillness too brittle to break. Passengers avoided one another's eyes, unsure of how to respond to what they had just witnessed. Some looked out windows. Some stared down at untouched drinks. Some pretended to read safety cards that had not changed in 20 years. No one spoke. Even Trina Caldwell, who moments ago had wielded her seniority like a badge, stood unusually still in the galley. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, her lips drawn into a flat line, her posture held together not by professionalism, but by pride. Isabel Torres lingered near the curtain, eyes still flicking nervously between her superior and the woman in 1A. Selina Moore remained seated. She hadn't spoken since handing over her boarding pass. She hadn't acknowledged the whispers. She hadn't reacted to the captain's ruling. Her silence now was not submission. It was something else entirely. It was a kind of stillness born of years of conditioning. The same stillness she had learned as a teenager being watched too closely in luxury boutiques. The same stillness she practiced during hostile boardroom stares from men who assumed her role must be honorary. Stillness that protected her, but it came at a cost. Inside, her mind was far from still. It pulsed with quiet thunder, not rage, not even sadness. Something deeper, a slow, aching recognition that even now, even here, in a space she had rightfully earned, her place had to be defended, not with a badge, Not with volume, but with restraint, with grace, with flawless paperwork. She reached for her glass of water. Her fingers were steady, her breath even, but in her chest a quiet grief bloomed. She had shown her ticket. She had held her ground. She had waited for truth to do its job, but the question lingered. Why had she been questioned at all? The aircraft vibrated faintly beneath her as the engines powered on, a sign that boarding was complete. The jet bridge was gone. There was no going back now. A voice came on over the cabin speakers. The announcement was sterile and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for pushback. Please take your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight time to Copenhagen is approximately 7 hours and 50 minutes. It ended without emotion, as though nothing had happened, as though silence erased conflict. Selina fastened her belt. She leaned back. The seat, once contested, now wrapped around her like armor. In row 3, Malik Jennings reviewed the clip on his phone. He hadn't posted it yet. He was still deciding. The footage was clean. It captured everything. The interaction, the body language, the exact moment the captain declared the seat belonged to Selina Moore. His thumb hovered over the share button. He had seen videos like this before, had shared them, had raged with others when justice wasn't served, but this one felt different. This was not about outrage. It was about a truth that had almost slipped by unnoticed. That would have been dismissed if not for the woman's stillness, the witness of a silent camera, the quiet authority of a captain who, for once, chose not to look away. He tapped save to device and slipped the phone into his pocket. For now, in the galley. Trina exhaled sharply. Isabel flinched at the sound. Trina turned to her, her voice low and clipped. Do not speak to her again unless directly addressed. Understood. Isabel nodded. Yes, ma'am. She didn't believe the command was right, but she wasn't ready to push back, not yet. She returned to checking trays. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind replayed the look in Selina's eyes. Calm, knowing, not just hurt, tired. The kind of tired that comes from fighting quiet wars no one else sees. The kind of tired that cannot be eased with hot towels or corporate apologies. Back in her seat, Selina reopened her tablet. The merger proposal was still glowing on the screen. Charts, forecasts, deadlines, numbers that meant progress, that meant investment, that meant the work she had poured herself into for 15 years. But her focus was fractured. The words swam. She closed the file. She needed something simpler. She opened a blank note and typed 3 words. I am here. It wasn't a statement of geography. It was a declaration. She deleted the words just as quickly, not because they were wrong, but because they were enough. She didn't need more. Just then, Isabel walked past with the drink cart. She stopped at Selina's row, hesitated, then gently leaned in. Water? Ms. Moore. Her voice was soft. Selina looked up. Yes, thank you. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough. Isabel handed over the glass, then moved down the aisle. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution, but it was something, a flicker of courage behind trained professionalism. Selina sipped her water slowly. In her peripheral vision, she noticed Derek Callahan shifting in his seat across the aisle. He looked like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. He just kept glancing at her, then away. Like he was rehearsing something in his head he wasn't brave enough to say. She turned her gaze back to the window. The aircraft had begun to taxi. The ground was moving beneath them. Soon they would lift into the sky, and this cabin would return to its usual rhythm, but not for her, not entirely. There was a weight now, not just from the incident, from what it meant, from how easily it had almost happened, how quickly the truth had been threatened by assumption, and how narrowly it had survived. The seatbelt sign chimed on, the lights dimmed, and in the quiet hush of departure, the cabin held its breath once more. But Selina exhaled. She was still here. Captain Elias Hart sat quietly in the cockpit, his hands resting on the throttle controls as the plane climbed toward cruising altitude. The sun was starting to break through the cloud cover, casting a faint orange glow across the sky. But his focus was not on the horizon. It was on what had just happened in his cabin. He had been flying commercial jets for over 20 years. Thousands of hours in the air, hundreds of routes. He had dealt with mechanical failures, unruly passengers, last-minute diversions. But this was different. This wasn't about turbulence or a faulty engine. This was about a choice. A moment where silence could have caused harm. He had read the manifest twice before stepping out. Watched the crew log, scanned the seating assignment. Seat 1A had always belonged to Selina Moore. There was no error, no last-minute swap, nothing technical to hide behind. The only thing in question was perception. And perception, in his experience, often determined outcomes far more than truth. Beside him, his co-pilot, Rajiv Patel, glanced up from the control panel. "You good?" Captain Elias nodded once. "Yes, just thinking." Rajiv didn't press. He could feel the weight in the older man's voice. It wasn't about flight paths. Elias had spent his life keeping emotion out of the cockpit. That was part of the job. Precision, calm, detachment. But back there, in that cabin, he hadn't been able to detach. He had seen it too many times, the slow erosion of dignity disguised as policy. He leaned forward and pressed the intercom button. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our initial cruising altitude. You're free to move about the cabin. Our crew will be with you shortly to begin meal service. Thank you again for choosing us." His voice was measured, but inside, he was restless. Back in the cabin, the lights had shifted to a soft amber glow. Passengers began to stir. Some unbuckled their belts. Others reached for laptops or opened novels. The tension had settled, but not disappeared. Selina Moore sat motionless. She had not slept. She had not even tried. Her mind was too full. She stared at the screen of her tablet, not reading, just watching the cursor blink in the corner of a blank document. She had opened a note titled Statement. She did not know yet if it would become one. She heard the clink of glassware as Isabel Torres prepared the drink service. From the occasional whispers, she could tell that something had shifted in the way people looked at her. Not openly, not rudely, just more carefully, as if they now knew she was a woman to be handled with caution. Selina didn't want fear. She wanted fairness. She wasn't looking to make a scene. She never had been. But she knew what people thought when someone like her demanded a place. Difficult, aggressive, disruptive. She had built an entire career on being undeniably excellent just to avoid those labels. And still, they found her from across the aisle. Derek Callahan finally spoke. "I just want to say, I didn't mean for that to happen." Selina turned to him slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "You didn't mean for what to happen." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at his lap. "I didn't know the seat was already assigned. They just told me it was mine." Selina nodded once, slowly, and when you saw me sitting there, Derek hesitated. I thought maybe they made a mistake. I figured they'd sort it out. She held his gaze. Do you think they would have asked you to move if I had arrived after you? He blinked. His lips parted, but no answer came. She waited, then turned back to her tablet. That's what I thought. The conversation ended not with anger, but with truth. And truth, in that quiet cabin, rang louder than anything else. Malik Jennings, still in 3C, watched it all unfold. He hadn't resumed recording. He didn't need to. What mattered had already been captured. He opened his phone, tapped into a private group chat of close friends, and sent the clip. Captioned only, "This happened today." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Across the aisle, Isabel paused again at Selina's row. "Ms. Moore, can I offer you something else to drink?" Selina looked up. "I'm fine, thank you." Isabel hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "For what it's worth, I believe in what you did." Selina met her eyes. "What I did was sit down." Isabel nodded and stayed seated. Their eyes met for a breath longer. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was something human. Isabel moved on, up in the cockpit. Captain Hart looked down at his logbook. The handwriting was clean, his notes routine. But under today's flight number, he paused. Then, in small capital letters, he wrote, "Do not ignore the quiet ones." He closed the book and stared out at the endless sky ahead. Malik Jennings pressed send. The video was gone from his phone, flying through invisible networks above the Atlantic. Just a short clip, under 90 seconds. No narration, no editing, just what happened. The way Selina Moore had been asked to move, the way she hadn't, the way the captain had settled it all with quiet authority. He did not post it publicly. Not yet. He sent it to his brother first, then a close friend who ran a digital publication in D.C., and then he put his phone face down on his tray table. He wasn't chasing likes. He wasn't trying to blow it up. But something inside him knew that silence could be a kind of violence too, and bearing witness had its own kind of duty. He looked back at Selina. She was seated the same as before, calm, steady, eyes forward. She hadn't said a word in hours, but her stillness had done more than shouting ever could. Selina, unaware her story was already leaving the cabin, was trying to focus again. She opened the merger file a second time, ran her eyes across numbers that used to feel like a source of power, but today they felt far away. She had always believed success would buy her distance from moments like this, that money, position, and visibility would be enough insulation. She had been wrong. That realization felt like grief. It settled in her bones, quiet, familiar. She had seen her mother wear that same grief in church halls and PTA meetings, when she had to smile through disrespect and pretend it hadn't happened. Selina swallowed hard. She wasn't 12 anymore. She didn't have to pretend. Across the aisle, Derek Callahan fidgeted in his seat. He kept glancing toward her, as if waiting for the right moment to try again. He still felt guilty, but not enough to be brave about it. He had never thought of himself as prejudiced. He believed in merit, in fairness. He told himself he would have reacted the same way no matter who was in the seat. But now, sitting across from her in silence, he wasn't so sure, and that doubt was louder than anything. In the galley, Trina Caldwell was quiet, The shift was over. There were no more requests to bark, no more protocol to wield, only silence. She had miscalculated. She knew that now. She had counted on the usual pattern: quiet compliance, a woman backing down to avoid conflict, a moment resolved before it ever became public. But this time, the woman didn't move, and the captain had backed her. Trina stared at the water bottle in her hands, the label half peeled from where her fingers had picked at it. She would have to file a report. There would be questions, maybe more. She didn't want to think about that, so she didn't. Isabel Torres stood a few feet away, watching her. Isabel had seen enough now to know where she stood, and it wasn't beside Trina anymore. She still hadn't spoken up, not out loud, but something inside her had shifted. A quiet vow had taken root. The next time it happened, she would not stay silent, because the look in Selena Moore's eyes still lingered in her mind. It wasn't angry, it wasn't cold, it was tired, and it was the kind of tired Isabel never wanted to cause again. In row 5, an older woman opened her phone after hearing the seatbelt sign chime off. A notification caught her eye, a forwarded clip. She pressed play without thinking. She watched the entire scene unfold: the request, the refusal, the silence, the captain. She turned the volume down and watched it again. Then she sent it to her niece, and her niece sent it to her group chat. By the time the plane had reached the midpoint of its journey, the video had already landed, not just on one phone, but dozens, and from there, dozens more. In a newsroom in Atlanta, Malik's friend, Sierra Ray, opened the message he had sent with a short caption. "You might want to see this." She watched it, twice. Her fingers moved fast. She clipped it, branded it with her outlet's watermark, reached out to verify the source, and then she wrote the headline, "Black CEO asked to vacate first-class seat. Her response silences the cabin." She paused, then hit publish. She knew it would spread, because it said something everyone had felt: that success does not shield you, that sometimes dignity has to be defended even at 35,000 feet, and that justice, when it comes quietly, still changes everything. Back on the plane. Selena didn't know any of this yet. Her phone was in airplane mode. She was finally dozing off, her cheek resting gently against the seat back. Her dreams were quiet, but her presence still echoed down the aisle. No one had approached her again. No one dared, not because they feared her, but because the illusion had broken. She didn't need to prove her place anymore. She had simply kept it, and in doing so, reminded everyone around her what power looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It didn't come in a uniform or a raised voice. It came in stillness, in certainty, in knowing exactly who you are and refusing to shrink. Outside the window, the sky had gone from soft blue to deep violet. The world beyond the clouds was vast, and the story they were carrying was already moving faster than the jet itself. The wheels touched down at Copenhagen International Airport with a soft jolt. The cabin exhaled. Travelers shifted upright, adjusting their seats and belongings, already preparing for the rhythm of arrival. Laptops closed, jackets tugged from overhead bins. The shuffle of normalcy returned, but the air was different. As the plane taxied toward the gate, whispers floated down the aisle. Not about connecting flights or lost luggage, but about the woman in seat 1A, about what had happened, about what might still be happening beyond the cabin. Selena Moore hadn't spoken a word since waking up an hour before landing. She had quietly accepted a breakfast tray. She had thanked Isabel when she brought her a fresh glass of orange juice. She had smiled, briefly, when a child 2 rows behind her peeked between the seats with curious eyes. But, mostly, she remained still, watching, waiting. She felt it in her gut. Something had changed. When she retrieved her phone and took it out of airplane mode, the screen lit up with a storm of notifications, messages, missed calls, emails, mentions. A text from her assistant popped up first. "You're trending." She blinked. Another message followed, a video, from a man named Malik Jennings. Selena opened it, and there she was, on screen, in frame, sitting calmly while being told to leave her seat. Her own face, her voice, played back at her. Then the captain, the resolution, the quiet. She watched the clip in full, and when it ended, she simply stared at the black screen. She had not asked for attention. She had not invited it. But attention had arrived anyway. She glanced toward Malik's seat. He had stood and was retrieving his carry-on from the overhead bin. He noticed her watching. Their eyes met. He gave her a nod, not the kind that asked for anything, not a request for credit or acknowledgement, just a nod between 2 people who had seen the same thing and refused to pretend they hadn't. She returned the gesture. Passengers began to disembark. Some nodded to her as they passed. One woman, maybe in her 40s, paused and said quietly, "You shouldn't have had to go through that. Thank you for holding your ground." Selena replied with a quiet, "Thank you." It was all she had energy for. Trina Caldwell stood near the front, stiff and forced in her goodbye tone. She did not meet Selena's eyes. Captain Hart, however, was waiting just behind the open cockpit door. As Selena stepped forward, he inclined his head. "Safe travels, Ms. Moore." His tone was respectful, earnest. She nodded. "Thank you for your professionalism, Captain." It was not flattery, it was acknowledgement. They parted without further words. The terminal was already buzzing by the time she reached customs. Her phone vibrated again. An email from a colleague in New York. "Selena, I saw the clip. Whatever you need, media, legal, support, we're behind you." Behind her, the words unsettled her for a moment. She hadn't started anything, but maybe something had started anyway. Outside, the air in Copenhagen was brisk. Selena pulled her coat tighter, stepping into the waiting car her team had arranged. Inside the vehicle, she finally opened the link her assistant had texted. The headline read, "Black CEO asked to move from first-class seat." Her silence said everything. The piece was short, observational, poised, but it was the video that had captured people. That had done the work words could not. In the comments, there were debates, praise, outrage, denial, support. Some called it a misunderstanding. Others called it exactly what it was. Selena scrolled, her heart steady but full. Then her screen lit up again. An incoming call. From her company's board chair, Margaret Ellison. She answered. Margaret's voice came through, calm but direct. "Selena, I assume you've seen the footage." "Yes." "Are you all right?" "I am." "Good. We've had inquiries from 2 major outlets and a civil rights advocacy group. They're asking if you'd like to make a statement." Selena paused. She looked out the window at the unfamiliar city rushing by. The driver said nothing. The radio played something soft in the background. Selena considered her words carefully. "I'll think about it. You don't have to say anything," Margaret added quickly, "but if you do, the timing is yours. Just know whatever you decide, we will stand with you. Thank you." They ended the call. Selena leaned back in her seat. Her mind buzzed with questions. Should she speak? Would it help? Would it change anything? Would it open her up to scrutiny, to vitriol? Or would it finally shift something for someone else? She thought of the women who had come before her, the mentors who taught her to be twice as prepared, twice as calm, twice as resilient. Women who had never had the luxury of public sympathy, who had been denied first class not just on planes but in every space they entered. Maybe this moment was for them too. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a name she hadn't expected. James Osei, a venture capitalist, high profile, reserved, powerful. His text was simple. "I saw the clip. We need to talk." Selena stared at the message, then tucked the phone in her lap. The car continued toward the hotel, and though her body was tired, her mind was suddenly clear. She hadn't planned to become a story, but now that she was one, she would make sure it had a purpose. The hotel room overlooked a quiet canal, its still waters reflecting the pale light of a cloudy Copenhagen afternoon. Selena Moore stood by the window, arms crossed, her phone resting on the small table behind her. She hadn't touched it since the car ride. She needed the silence. It was strange. She had spent the last 10 years juggling noise calls, pitches, deadlines, boardroom politics, but now, when the world had finally decided to listen, she found herself craving stillness. The knock on the door startled her, not sharply, but enough to pull her from her thoughts. Room service. She thanked the attendant, accepted the tray, and set it down beside the phone. Coffee, toast, some kind of berry preserve. She wasn't hungry. Her eyes returned to the phone. James Osei. They hadn't spoken in almost a year, not since a tense round of funding negotiations where they had walked away from each other on principle. He had respected her stance, but their relationship remained distant, until now. She sat down, folded her hands on her lap, and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Selena, James." There was a pause. "You're probably exhausted," he said. "Not as much as you'd think." Another pause. "I watched the clip," he added. "All of it. I watched your face when they asked you to move. You didn't flinch. You didn't raise your voice. You just sat there. What did you see? I saw the future." That caught her off guard. "James, what are you saying?" He leaned forward, though she could not see him. This wasn't just an incident. It was a mirror. It showed us everything we need to understand about where power still lives and how fragile it is when it's held by the wrong hands. You showed the world what controlled power looks like. Quiet power. That is more rare than people think. Selena didn't respond right away. She looked out the window again. A cyclist passed on the path below, scarf billowing behind him in the wind. James continued, "I have partners in London. One of them forwarded the clip to me. Said he hadn't seen anything that compelling since the congressional hearings last spring. And here's the thing. It wasn't just you sitting in that seat. It was what that seat represented." He paused. "I want to talk about building something." Selena raised an eyebrow. "Building what? A fund, a platform, a coalition. Call it what you want, but something long-lasting. Not just a reaction to this moment. A structure that elevates women like you, black leaders like you, people whose presence makes others uncomfortable not because they are wrong, but because the system has been wrong for too long." She considered his words carefully. You think people are ready to back that they're not, but they're listening, and sometimes listening is the first crack. Selena stood and walked slowly toward the window, phone to her ear. You want me to become the face of this? I want you to become the force of it. She let the words settle. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her. Calm, controlled, but something had started to stir underneath. She wasn't seeking revenge, but she did crave reckoning. She thought of Isabel's quiet shame, of Trina's defiance, of Derek's discomfort, of the captain's careful choice, of Malik's steady phone, and of every woman who had ever been asked to shrink to make others comfortable. "It's too soon," she said finally. "I haven't even unpacked. I haven't had a moment to understand what this has become. James didn't push, then take the time. But know this, when you're ready, the door's open, and you won't be alone." He meant it. She could hear it in his voice. "Thank you, James. No, thank you for not standing up." They ended the call. Selena placed the phone down gently. She walked to the bathroom, washed her face, and stared at her reflection. She didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like a woman who had wanted to fly in peace. But maybe symbols were just people who got caught doing the right thing when others were watching. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Isabel. A short message. "Just wanted to say thank you. I'm not sure I'll stay in this job, but I will never forget what I saw." Selena smiled, a little sad, a little proud. She wrote back, "You don't have to stay, but you do have to stay brave." And then she turned off the phone, just for a while. Let the world wait. Outside, the canal remained still, but somewhere far beyond, a ripple was growing. Selena Moore sat at the desk in her hotel suite, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. The world was waiting for a response. Every inbox she opened was full of interview requests. Her company's PR team had offered to draft something for her, but she had politely declined. If this was going to be said, it would be in her own voice. She had spent years crafting language for investors and boards. She knew how to be polished, how to use corporate terms that sounded respectful while saying very little. But this moment didn't call for polish. It called for clarity. She took a breath and began to type. "I didn't plan to make a statement because I didn't expect to become a headline. What happened to me on that flight was not extraordinary. It was all too ordinary. A seat was questioned. A presence was challenged. A person was asked to move. That person was me." She paused and read the words again. They sounded like truth, not anger, not performance, just fact. She continued, "I was asked to give up something I had earned, not because of a mistake, not because of a system error, but because someone looked at me and saw a question mark where there should have been a period." That line made her pause. She leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. Across the room, the late afternoon sun stretched across the floor, fading into shadows. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched since breakfast. Selena turned back to the screen. For those wondering what I felt in that moment, I felt nothing new. I felt the echo of every meeting where I had to reintroduce myself. I felt the weight of every room I entered where I was assumed to be the assistant, the intern, the mistake. But I also felt something else. I felt the presence of the women who taught me to sit tall, to hold eye contact, to speak when necessary, and to be silent when it speaks louder. She stopped again. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the mouse. She scrolled back to the top of the document. No edits. She wasn't rewriting. She was remembering. A notification popped up. A message from Malik Jennings. Just 2 words. "Thank you." She replied. For what? A few seconds passed. Then his answer came. For not letting it slide. She smiled. Then she returned to the statement. She was nearly finished. I did not resist. I simply remained seated. And in doing so, I remembered who I was. Not a problem, not a disruption, but a presence that mattered. She added one last line before closing her laptop. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the standard. She saved the document. Then she emailed it to her communications lead with a short message. Run it as is. No edits. She stood up and walked to the window. Copenhagen's skyline was still unfamiliar. Bicycles zipped past cobblestones. Streetcars clanged quietly in the distance. She could not see them, but she could feel people starting to listen. Really listen. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her. Margaret Ellison again. Selena answered. "It's out," she said simply. Margaret's voice came through, tight with emotion. "Selena, it's perfect. Thank you. I just got a call from the network. They want you on prime time." Selena hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for TV." Margaret was quiet for a second. "You don't have to say yes. But if you do, it won't just be about you. It'll be for every woman who watched that video and saw herself." Selena walked to the desk, sat down, and reopened her laptop. "Send them my talking points," she said, "but tell them I won't perform. I'll just speak. They'll respect that. And if they don't, then we'll know who they are too." They ended the call. Selena sat for a long moment with her palms resting flat on the desk. She let herself feel everything at once. The exhaustion, the fire, the fear, and the calm. There was a knock on her door. Room service again. She opened it to find a young staff member holding a white envelope. "For you, ma'am." Selena took it, confused. "Thank you." She opened the envelope slowly and found a handwritten note. It read, "You didn't have to do anything, but you did everything. Thank you for holding your seat." Signed, a silent sister. There was no name, just a signature in the form of 3 small dots. Selena closed her eyes. She folded the note and placed it in her journal. She would carry that with her. Maybe more than the headlines, more than the coverage. That anonymous voice said it best. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not move. That night, the statement went viral. Within minutes of being posted, it spread through every major platform. The phrase, "I didn't raise my voice," I raised the standard was being quoted, shared, printed on T-shirts before the hour was done. But Selena didn't read the reactions. Not yet. She brewed a fresh cup of tea, pulled a blanket over her shoulders, and sat near the window. She let herself breathe, because tomorrow, the real work would begin. Selena Moore woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating across the marble nightstand. The sky outside her hotel window was still dim with morning mist. But the digital world was already wide awake. Her statement had gone viral overnight. Tens of thousands of comments, hundreds of articles, 3 invitations to speak at upcoming leadership conferences, 2 cable news producers asking for exclusives. Her LinkedIn inbox was flooded, but so was her voicemail, and not all of it was kind. She scrolled through a list of messages, some filled with gratitude, others filled with warning. One simply said, "Go back to your lane." She let the words slide off her like water on glass. This was the cycle she knew too well. First, they doubt you, then they watch you, then they celebrate you, and finally, They challenge your right to speak again. But Selena had never been afraid of cycles. She had just learned how to break them. She opened her email and began replying to the messages that mattered. Her company's head of communications had drafted a press kit. The marketing team had created a new web page for people wanting to learn more about her story. Even her alma mater had reached out, asking if she would consider delivering this year's commencement address. Then came a meeting request from Margaret Ellison, marked urgent. They met on a secure video call, both of them still in casual clothes and coffee in hand. Margaret spoke first. I wanted to give you a heads up before the board meeting today. Some stakeholders are concerned about the visibility this has brought. Selena nodded, not surprised. Concerned how they're asking whether your presence in the media may create distractions, whether the company should release a neutral statement, whether we should her voice caught distance. Selena sat quietly for a moment. And what do you think I think? This company exists because you built it. From nothing. You didn't buy your way in. You didn't inherit a legacy. You made one. So, if they want to talk about distance, they better start measuring how far they'd fall without you. Selena's face softened. She rarely let herself feel moved during business calls, but this one was different. Thank you. Margaret, you don't have to fight this alone. I'm not the only one in that room who sees the truth. Still, Selena knew what was coming. Public praise was one thing, private boardrooms were another. When the call ended, she dressed in a black turtleneck, simple trousers, and a pearl pin her mother had given her years ago. It wasn't flashy, but it carried weight. She logged into the virtual board meeting at precisely 9. 11 faces greeted her on the screen, some warm, some stiff, one notably absent. The chair of the finance committee, Selena, spoke first. Before we begin today's agenda, I want to address the recent incident and the response that followed. I did not seek attention. I did not submit my story to the press. I merely existed in a space that was mine to occupy. No one interrupted. She continued. The attention was not requested, but it has revealed something larger than me, and I do not believe silence serves this company's values, or its mission. She paused, letting that settle. If anyone feels that my presence in the public sphere is detrimental to our work, I invite you to speak now. There was a moment of quiet. Then one of the younger board members spoke up. Selena, I watched the clip. I read your statement. I forwarded it to my daughter. She said it made her feel like she could take up space at her new job. That's not a distraction. That's leadership. Another voice chimed in. I may not agree with every post out there, but let's not forget our revenue has increased by 17% since this story broke. People trust the face they see, especially when it refuses to flinch. One by one, the voices joined. By the end of the meeting, there was no vote needed. The company would not distance itself. It would lean in. Selena signed off the call and sat back in her chair, letting the moment wash over her. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady. Later that afternoon, she received a call from Captain Elias Hart. She hadn't expected it. Selena, he said, I wanted to check in. I've received internal messages. They're launching a review of protocol, training, bias response. She raised an eyebrow. Because of what happened, because of what people saw. He hesitated. I hope I didn't overstep that day. I just couldn't pretend it was business as usual. You didn't overstep, Captain. You stepped up? He chuckled. Well, then, I guess we both stayed in our seats. They ended the call with mutual respect. That evening, Selena opened her notebook. Not the digital one, the real one. She flipped past pages filled with notes on valuations and product launches and timelines. She turned to a fresh page, and she wrote, "Power is not about taking space. It is about refusing to be erased from it." Then she closed the book. Outside, the lights of the city shimmered across the water. But inside, she no longer needed light to see clearly. She knew where she stood, and the world was still watching. 2 months later, Selena Moore stepped onto another plane, same airline, same model aircraft, different city, different day. But the memories were sharp. The crew greeted her at the door with practiced smiles, not forced, not overly warm, just human. There was no tension this time, no pause, no side glance. The flight attendant simply said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Moore. We're honored to have you." Selena nodded politely and walked down the aisle. This time, her name was printed clearly on the seat back of 1A. No one asked for her ticket. No one questioned her presence. She placed her bag in the overhead bin, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. She exhaled slowly. It had been a storm. In the weeks after her story went public, she had been on every screen, quoted in articles, invited to panels, turned into hashtags. But she had chosen her words carefully. She had not turned the moment into spectacle. She had not sought revenge. She had insisted on accountability. The airline had issued a formal apology. They had revised training protocols and initiated a third-party review of staff behavior and equity practices. Selena had declined to serve as the face of their reform. She did not want to be their redemption story. But she had made one request, that no one else would have to prove they belonged while already holding a boarding pass in their hand. She checked her phone one last time before switching it to airplane mode. An email from James Osei had just arrived. The seed fund they launched together had received full backing, $20 million secured in less than 8 weeks. The fund would focus on supporting underrepresented founders, not charity, not handouts, just access. Selena smiled softly. She texted back 2 words, "Let's fly." As she slipped her phone into her purse, a familiar voice spoke from across the aisle. "Excuse me, Ms. Moore." She turned to find a young woman, maybe early 20s, sitting in 1B, nervous, fidgeting with her sleeve. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you." Selena raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For making it easier for someone like me to imagine this seat." Selena looked into the woman's eyes. She saw herself, not in features, but in feeling. The hunger, the quiet hope, the way you hold your breath when you sit somewhere new, waiting to be told you don't belong. "What's your name, Naomi? And what do you do?" "Naomi. I just got hired at a global climate firm. This is my first work trip. I almost didn't accept the seat when they upgraded me. I thought maybe it was a mistake." Selena tilted her head gently. It wasn't. Naomi nodded, smiling shyly. "I know. Now." The plane began to taxi. Overhead, the lights dimmed slightly. A new captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are next for departure. Please ensure your seat belts are securely fastened. Thank you for choosing us." Selena closed her eyes as the engines rumbled to life. The sound wasn't threatening anymore. It was familiar, rhythmic, steady. The plane accelerated, lifted, climbed. Outside the window, the clouds parted. Inside the cabin, no one shifted nervously, no one whispered. The silence was different this time. Not tense, just peaceful. Selena leaned back and allowed herself a rare moment of rest. She had earned it. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendant returned with a tray. "Ms. Moore, your usual." She smiled. "Yes, thank you." She accepted the tea and opened the small journal tucked in her bag. A note fluttered out. The same note from the hotel. "You didn't have to do anything, but you did everything." She placed it beside her tea, then turned to a fresh page and began to write. This time, not a speech, not a strategy, just a letter. To herself. She wrote, "Dear Selena, you stayed in your seat, and in doing so, you shifted something that was never yours to fix, but you fixed it anyway. You did not owe the world a performance, but you gave them an example. You stood still when the moment begged for noise, and your silence roared louder than protest. You changed something quietly, without asking permission, with grace, with truth. And because of that, others will rise without asking. They will take their seat without flinching. And when they are told to move, they will remember you." She paused, letting the ink dry. Then she folded the letter and slipped it between the pages. The plane flew on. No turbulence, just calm air and forward motion. When the flight landed, Selena exited without ceremony. No applause, no cameras. Just a few quiet nods from strangers who had recognized her. Outside, her driver waited. As the car pulled away from the terminal, Naomi emerged behind her, suitcase in tow, shoulders squared with new confidence. Selena watched her in the mirror for a second, then turned her gaze forward. She was not a headline anymore. She was something deeper, a reminder. That dignity cannot be reassigned, and courage sometimes looks like doing nothing at all except refusing to leave. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Selena Moore didn't fight back with fists or fury. She fought with presence, with poise, with a refusal to disappear when the world said she didn't belong. In a world where people still question who gets to sit in the front, this story reminds us that dignity doesn't come from approval. It comes from within. But what if no one had recorded the moment? What if no one spoke up? How many people stay silent every day when they're asked to move, not just physically, but socially? Let this story be a reminder to listen, to speak when needed, and to stand or sit for what's right, even when no one else does. To the Isabels who notice, to the Maliks who document, to the Selenas who don't flinch, we see you, we thank you. If this story moved you, if you believe every person deserves respect, no matter where they sit, then, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Silent Defenders for more true stories of justice, power, and quiet courage. Because next time, it could be your story we tell.